Hi, friends. Welcome to this session on resources to use with students right now. Here we are in December. It's the end of the year. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Ethan. If we've never met before, hi, I'm the college essay guy. I don't always sound like this. I've got a little froggy in my throat that's holding on for dear life. I use he, him pronouns, and I love being in community with you. That's what I'm checking in with. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Campbell. I also use he, him pronouns. I'm not the college essay guy. I'm a college essay guy. I've been using that tagline now for too many sessions, but it's still accurate. So about me, I work as college essay guys community manager and senior essay specialist. So I work one-on-one with students as well as helping put together webinars and programming for students, parents, counselors. And prior to working in this role, I worked in college admissions at College of the Holy Cross and Pomona College for a total of 6 years. And I also worked at Lakeside School in Seattle as a college counselor, helping students and families applying to mostly selective colleges, which tends to be oftentimes what get a lot of airtime in the media. Cue groans because we're run counselors and boo. And not a but, and also tends to be what a lot of people come to us for support on because colleges that have essays typically tend to be more selective colleges. So that's why I'm here. And yeah, happy to be, as Ethan said, in community with you all. Ditto. Retweet.
And thanks. And shout out to Alex, who is our awesome moderator today. And thanks for being here. Today, we're going to talk about how to help students write better essays in less time. It's the super essay strategy. Some of you have heard it before, but some of you maybe haven't. Then Tom's going to talk about how to up level a why us essay and how to help students cut words. We've got a resource to share on each of those. I think maybe most of you haven't seen our resource on cutting words effectively, so that'll be new stuff. How to know if an essay is done and ready to submit, I'll tackle that. And then I'm going to talk about, this is relatively new content because I don't often talk about this, but it's working with parents and what are some strategies for working with parents before the process starts, in the middle of the process, and closer to the end. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. And we'll talk a little bit about our counselor training program, which launched today and which is basically starting in January of next year and running the whole darn year in our community. So we'll share more about that at the end. But for now, if you're just joining us, we're checking in with what is your least favorite holiday song? Feel free to throw it into the chat. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and do questionably British accents. And here's the first resource. So this is how to write a super essay. So a super essay is essentially an essay that students can use to save tons of time. So essentially the way this works is thinking about, okay, whoops, let me zoom back. There we go. Oh, there we go. This is the one I was looking for. So let's say a student has, for example, an essay that they need to write about a community that they belong to, or a perspective that they bring or experiences they've had. And they also have to write about something that's meaningful to them and why. Well, it could just be that one essay works for all those. Some of you are like, yes, Ethan, I know this. I've read the super essay blog, but I think this Venn diagram helps to show it pretty well. My advice is for students to write the longest one first. So write that whatever 350 word or 400 word version and then trim it down because I think it's easier to trim than it is to add stuff often. And here's some stuff that maybe here's kind of like a step-by-step guide on this. I'll share a link, a resource for this. But essentially, I often advise students to use an extracurricular activity for these. Some of you will be like, yes, I do that too. But I think that oftentimes students are maybe not emphasizing extracurricular activities or talking about them only briefly in their personal statement. So I'm like, what's that awesome thing that you want to make sure that you're bringing to the campus and that's showing that other side of you, quote unquote? And so just some examples of these real quick. Let me just flash these. These are ones that'll be familiar to many of you, but, art making and, an internship that they've done or being an amazing cook. These are all things that count for me as like potential, what I call super topics. And the main thing here is to think about, okay, well, what is the thing that's either my rock star accomplishment that maybe isn't getting emphasized elsewhere, or maybe if the student hasn't addressed sort of fit to major in their personal statement, and they've sort of been talking about, I don't know, their love of running or something, this could be an opportunity for them to say, hey, here's this really cool project I've done in my thing that I'm interested in, computer science or medicine, et cetera. And the way to essentially do this, I'll share a resource on this, is to essentially, we have this essay tracker that's a spreadsheet that students can put their prompts on, and then they just basically list their topics that they're using in each of the different. So for example, I'm wanting to write about this summer job that I had working at this ice cream shop, and I see that topic could work for this, and this prompt. So they basically go through the spreadsheet tracker. And let me just give a quick example of this. So here, I'll just bring one in. This is from a student from a few years ago, but students can basically go through this. And for example, this student was writing about construction for his UC, What Sets You Apart. And it turns out, and you can see them color coded here, that essay also worked for, Harvard's additional essay. And it also worked for, tell us about something that's meaningful to you and why, which was a previous Stanford essay. And so the idea here is writing that once students see that they don't have to write 20 essays, that they really have to write 6 essays and do it well, that sometimes that can reduce stress, especially right now, right around the holiday time, when they're like, do I even apply to these schools or not? Because I look at all these essays and I'm feeling stressed. So I'll share a blog with all of these kind of tips, but essentially it walks them through how to brainstorm all of these, and it gives them an example version of one of these. So that's kind of the long and short of the super essay strategy. And again, I'll share the blog in the chat. Tom, I'm going to kick it to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ethan. So one thing I was going to do before, while I'm pulling up my screen sharing, I'm actually just going to launch a poll, like a regular Zoom poll. So you should be seeing it ideally somewhere come up. And we were just curious about how many CEG webinars you have attended. And then I asked Ethan, I'm like, since when? And he's like, forever. Like, in your lifetime, how many total have you attended? Mostly just out of curiosity and data collection. So thank you in advance for filling that out.
There's
so I'm gonna,
no option for this is my first, so we're just assuming that it was me. But if this is your first,
if you haven't done one,
you can just like Allison's comment.
Yeah, there you go.
Great.
Yeah. And in the spirit, Mindy and Tammy, hi, and Allison, so many people. This is great that there's actually so many first folks, and it's super helpful to us to know, because sometimes, for example, the resource I'm about to share with you, I imagine many of you who filled out I've seen 11 plus college essay guide webinars are going to be like, yeah, I know you have a Why Us essay guide, but we do have always new people who are coming into our fold, who are new to the profession, new to their role, working with students and families. So we do kind of try to cover the greatest hits, like Mariah, she can't just be singing all the deep cuts. She needs to do All I Want for Christmas every closing show. So essentially the All I Want for Christmas Is You blog that I'm about to share with you is the Why Us guide. So
we love a theme. We love a theme.
We love a theme. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about Why Us essays, and increasingly something that I've kind of started to notice is, I think because many colleges are adapting and modifying their supplemental essay prompts, especially I'd say in wake and in response to the Supreme Court decision on race conscious admission, I'm actually kind of seeing less and less schools having that kind of traditional explicit Why Us essay. And interestingly enough, myself and my colleague Hannah, we do work with a school in India, and they kind of talk with us about how, because so many of the schools that their students were targeting are not asking that kind of traditional Why Us question anymore, they're actually feeling more lost in terms of I don't really know as much kind of what to share then if I'm just talking about, for example, so many colleges are moving more towards, we want to know more about your lived experience and how that shapes and is going to contribute your college campus. So one of the kind of Why Us strategies that I want to share with you today, I think is particularly timely and relevant, and I think really models out how to kind of in the spirit of not but and how to kind of infuse identity and particularly lived experience into Why Us essays, because I actually think, especially in this current application cycle and landscape, I think it can really benefit students a lot and just provide a lot more distinction in terms of the cut and dry approach to Why Us essays. Many of us work with students who prefer to be a little more formulaic, especially students who writing is not necessarily their forte. It's a lot of I want to know what course and what research program and what extracurricular to plug into this essay, and then change the schools and have it all be done and good. And that approach can, for the most part, work finely for many students. Many students are admitted to schools that are really exciting for them, who do provide that level of specificity. I was working with a student last year, and he told me, he was like, don't the admissions officers just know that all we're doing, the only reason I'm applying here is because it's a really good school, And I don't really care as much about all these things that I'm listing off of doing, but I'm just doing it to basically fulfill what they're asking. And I told him, you have a great point. As someone who's read many of these essays in my previous life, and I'm still reading many of those essays now. But I think what I reminded him was that there are many students in the pool who are still keeping things very surface level. So I guess kind of in the spirit of like, there's a reason why the greatest hits are greatest hits. That adding specificity into YS essays and identifying and working with students to find specific resources, opportunities, classes, particular ways that they teach architecture that are different than other schools. That level of depth and research, especially when this landscape is becoming more competitive, is something that, while admittedly tedious, especially for I think a lot of younger teens who are used to growing up in a TikTok generation where things are readily available at your fingertips and you don't always need to do a ton of research to find out the TLDR, the too long didn't read, of what you're communicating. But I think as a counselor, definitely encouraging students and just reminding them that like there are a lot of students who are keeping things pretty general and are just saying, I like helping people. Medicine is great. You have a great med school.
Can, can I say something? Can I say something real quick? Yeah, because somebody asked that in a session, a counselor session, like recently, is like I don't know, a year and a half ago. It was like, if everybody's doing the same thing, do they care? And there was an admission officer, I forget from which school, that stood up and was like, actually, you'd be surprised. So I want to say to y'all from that college admission officer that you'd be surprised at what the range, and maybe you've seen these because you've seen initial drafts and you've seen how general students are, but many, in fact, maybe most essays are those initial drafts where it's sort of like there just aren't a lot of capital letters, aka specifics from the school. So
the capital letter tip is a really, really great one. And I just shared, the link in the chat for you all, and it'll be emailed to you as a follow-up for this session. But this is kind of our go-to key in the CEG canon. This is like a key kind of piece of material that we have. And the blog does a really great job of kind of just introducing the concept of a YS essay to someone who's less familiar. And it particularly kind of goes through 3 different approaches that we recommend students potentially folding in. The first 2 that you're going to see on this blog are pretty, especially if you've been working with students and families for a while and you've been working this, isn't your first rodeo. You probably are going to be familiar with the basic concept of what these 2 approaches share. But I actually really want to spend a little bit of time on the third one, which I think is kind of a little more distinctive. And I have a particular essay that's not included in this blog that I just want to showcase for the sake of best practices, especially related to my first point about identity and how that can actually be woven into YS essays to make them a lot more compelling and memorable in a sea of many students identifying similar programs, opportunities, etc. But even that, again, as we said, is kind of like the next step in the general application pool. So my first biggest tip on this blog that I definitely think is really helpful to send to students is, after kind of just doing the overview of kind of like what YSSs are and how they're great, it's this not this YS guide. It's this YS essay research chart. So the link to the chart is right here on the blog. And this is something that I use with pretty much all my students that I work with one-on-one to help them just have a place to put down all of their research that they really do have to do to, I think, write these really well. I always recommend that students also kind of go wide when it comes to sourcing information. So a first place would definitely be the college's own website, taking a look at the department website for the particular major or program that they're interested in. It seems like a no-brainer, but a lot of times really students have never been on that page before and yet are dead set that, Princeton is my dream school. So definitely want to have them, I'd say, start with that. And then ideally, have them maybe go to like the news section of a college or university. There's oftentimes like new initiatives or programs or research partnerships that a college has announced that really are timely and relevant, and sometimes often are tied to what a college is really kind of looking for in their students. If they're investing all this time and money in a new humanities studio that has this great theme of lectures, one for every month, maybe that's a good sign that they're investing money in that and it kind of want people to attend and participate and engage with that community. So the news section of a college is a great place for them to go to. College's social media accounts, as someone who used to run one, I put a lot of effort and thought into kind of what programs and students we were highlighting and experiences. And they were often like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to people tuning in of like, these are things that we really celebrate and kind of want more of in our community. So I think that's a great place to go to. There's also like schools encouraging them to look at schools newspapers. A lot of times that's kind of a voice of like, this is what the students are talking about. These are things that they're protesting about on campus. Things that not necessarily to have your YSSA be all about. Here's all the things that are wrong with your school, but just to show that kind of like you are wanting to be an informed consumer and to know from multiple perspectives and vantage points what a college has to offer. It shows, I'd say, such a further degree of research and thought and intentionality in an era where so few people want to put in the time to do that. It may be sound tedious to students, but at least kind of giving them like a chart to organize and dump all their thoughts and just some general guidelines about where to go for some help with that is a great first step. And then when it comes to these kind of three different approaches, so the approach number one, very kind of the basic why us essay, where essentially kind of you start off at the top, kind of mentioning and summarizing like, here's what I'm interested in doing in my future or what I want to be as a student. And here's why insert school is a great place for that. Let me tell you why. And then ideally in this essay, this will really depend on the word count, but I'd say identifying anywhere between 1 to 3 key main reasons as to why the school appeals to you. There are places I think Dartmouth still does this where it's like 100-word why Dartmouth or maybe even like 50 words. And it's basically like, okay, so you want like a sentence. So depending on the word count, this is going to be more or less challenging for you. But I would say having your student gather all that research, and then especially if you're working with them pretty intimately, being able to help them identify like, okay, here are maybe, I also recommend if a school asks multiple essay prompts where, for example, they have a long essay that's why major, you don't need to have every single example in your why us essay that's more broad be all about academics, because you can use the why major essay to talk about some of those specifics. So I'd say also to be strategic with like using the why us essay to fill in gaps and blanks that haven't gotten as much airtime that you want the school to know more about. So if they already have a more academically minded supplemental essay prompt you have to complete, this more broad why us can be a chance to talk more about your community involvement and kind of what you're contributing. So this sample essay that's here does a really good job at kind of modeling out this like basic structure that we list here. The second one is a pretty similar. So approach number 2 is pretty similar, but it basically kind of just highlights more unique reasons. So it's less like you have great classes that I want to take it. I can do research programs or study abroad. This is interesting. The 3 to 5 unique reasons one is kind of like, I'd say a level 2, where the things that the student is citing are very special to that school. So like, oh, at WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, you have this amazing co-op program that very few schools in the US do, and you partner with da-da-da-da. That's really why I'm zeroing in on you with my search. There's just, again, a kind of a degree of like, you are above the rest of my college options, not explicitly saying that, but based on the unique things that you've identified is part of the rationale that a student has outlined. And the last one that I'll show before turning the mic back to Ethan is this one value strategy. These are kind of essays that I'll just say like kind of as a reader, I don't think we spend as much time, letting students know about the importance of like a school's mission statement and values, and how having at least even a peripheral awareness of that can really help enhance and tailor your YS essay from school to school. So that way you're not just having it be completely recycled with just the classes changed, the professors changed, whatever, the clubs changed, whatever it may be. So this is one that I really want to underscore, as I'd say, especially in your practice, to really kind of have a student look, and this sample essay, I think, really speaks to a values alignment with the school. And another kind of essay that I wanted to show here that is kind of more based on identity, I think is like a hybrid version of a few of these different approaches. But essentially, the student kind of starts off talking about where they're raised, how that kind of influenced their interest in computer science and art. And there's even like this little kind of like cute, like quippy response, like USC seems to hear it too. You're starting off the essay, I'd say, just like with a really good slam dunk opening of like, this is what I am and what I'm bringing to the table. And this is what you have. And I'm showing you an alignment in terms of values, skills, qualities, aspirations. And we're a really good match for each other. So the sample essay kind of goes on to, I want to be involved with printmaking because I can see that being a place for me to learn more about my Latino heritage. I'm really committed to service in Seattle. I've done this. USC clearly is, in a similar alignment with what I've already done. And this is an example of how they've done that as well. I love that the last sentence is about bulgogi trucks and kind of like food trucks. So maybe if we're doing a little more like refinement and like the 2.0 version of this would be like maybe some kind of concluding sentence. But also at the end of the day, like this kind of essay is folding in so much about a student, identity, things they've already done, the things about USC that they're excited about. So in very few words, they're kind of already like really communicating essentially their value add to this place. So I hope that was a little helpful to you.
Yay. I want to talk a little bit about questions to ask a student when they're revising. So I'm going to make a little tweak because I was going to talk about how do you know when the essay is done, which I'll get to in a minute. But I want to share with y'all 4 questions that I think we can ask students when, and you can actually like give them these 4 questions when it comes to revising their essays. So, I find that there are some students who want to write about challenges, but the majority of students aren't. And they're writing about, things ranging from animals to, a major interest, or they're writing about a particular skill they have. And so if a student, and I call this a montage, if they're writing about a particular theme, here are some questions that and there's not like a resource that I'm going to send for this one. I'm just going to kind of share these with you. But some of the questions that I encourage students to ask is it clear what your topic is? Now, that might seem like an obvious question, but that you can read you can read an essay and like not actually be clear, what the topic is. So is it clear what my topic is? And I would add to this maybe, and is it clear in the first maybe 2 paragraphs? Because I know for me, when I'm reading an essay and I'm 3 paragraphs in and I'm still trying to figure out what the topic is, my brain, it's like my RAM is taken up, it's distracted by trying to figure out what is this essay even about. So I've come more and more to tell students like, hey, your reader may be skimming, they might be reading a ton of essays. Can you clarify your topic and orient them in the first couple paragraphs? And so I would maybe say, is it clear what my topic is? And maybe hopefully in the first couple paragraphs. And I didn't used to feel that way. I used to be more like, no, you can chill, they're going to be fine. But I'm leaning more towards encouraging them to clarify the topic. The next question I'll encourage students to ask is, are the examples in each paragraph strong, specific, and visual? And strong is kind of equals specific and visual. And this is, I may be preaching to the choir here, but having those examples that really pop into my head and create these little memorable snapshot moments. And I tell students, I don't want you to think of it like a mini movie. I want you to think of it like you're scrolling through your phone and you're like, here's an image that shows me in my commitment to service or my commitment to social justice. So it's an image because that's about how much room they'll have in their paragraph. And then is it clear what values that they're trying to show in each paragraph? And this is a great way to orient students when you're looking at the 3rd paragraph and you're like, what is this paragraph even about? If you can help them center on a particular value. Like today I was giving a student notes and I was like, hey, this paragraph seems to be about courage and about your ability to like find a home anywhere, to make yourself comfortable. Is that right? And if so, you're doing it in 109 words. I think you can do it in 50. And that's the note that I gave. And I was basically sort of using reflective language to help the student figure out what is the value. And if that's truly what she's trying to show, can she do it more succinctly? Because she was, trying to trim her essays. And then this one is this notion of insights. I've come to think of this idea, insights, as being something that surprises. So, when I think about an essay, it could be that the topic surprises me, which is great, but it could be that the topic is, running. And I'm like, oh, okay. And if the topic is running, I really am going to need those insights, those moments that surprise me, that share with me how some particular quality or value that you developed is applied elsewhere in your life. Because as I say to students often, your topic isn't your topic. This isn't an essay about running. Running is just the vehicle that you're using to kind of show them your values, the things that you care about. So the insights I find in a montage essay are often things that are going to happen towards the ends of those paragraphs. So what are those final things that you see and you're like, because I think oftentimes, again, if a reader's skimming, they're maybe looking at the first sentences, the topic sentences, and getting down. And I find that it's those ends of those sentences that if those can pop, if a couple of those can really sing, that can really make a difference. So this kind of overlaps a little bit with my great college essay test, which I'll share a link to in the follow-up to this webinar. But some of the things that I'm interested in looking for when I'm looking for what is a great college essay does the student have values? Like, am I able to go through, and if I was an admission reader, say to, Tom as my fellow admission reader and say, hey, I think this student is fantastic. And I can point to these 3 or 4 things that they were really committed to: social justice in this paragraph, and their commitment to their family. Look how it comes through in these specific examples of them doing this construction work. And seeing those specific values and the specific examples, I think, is going to help a reader make the case if, for example, they end up going to a committee review. And so some of the 4 qualities that I think are important: values. I think insight is another one of those. And I've said in the past that I feel like vulnerability is important, and it's kind of a complicated word, vulnerability. I think that it's funny. I'm kind of working on a new college essay test, and this is like, I haven't released this yet or put anything, but one of the things that I'm thinking about is like, I think vulnerability can be important, but to me, oftentimes what's most interesting to me when I'm reading an essay these days is something like originality. And I'm playing around with potentially switching out that quality in my great college essay test, because I feel like, I don't know if Tom and I have even talked about this, because I feel like when I look at a great essay, if it's vulnerable, and when I've seen great ones, not all of them are vulnerable, not all of them are vulnerable, even in the classic sense. But I oftentimes, when I say originality, I mean, has the student chosen a topic that is surprising to me or less common, or are they taking something that is more common and making it less common by the connections that they're making, which is to say the values or the examples or the insights. Now, some students are writing about challenges. So here are some questions to ask if they are writing about challenges. And again, there's no resource that I'm sending out with this one, so if you want to write these down, feel free. But first of all, is it clear what those challenges are? And you probably wouldn't be surprised, but maybe you would be surprised that sometimes the students haven't clarified what those challenges are in the essay. And are those challenges compelling? Simple question, but it's an important one, because sometimes I'll read an essay and I'll be like, there's something that's kind of missing from this essay. And what is it? And it's like, oh, it's that I'm not actually too engaged with what this challenge is, or there's a way that the challenge isn't yet engaging me. And the second set of questions that I'll ask is it clear what the effects of the challenges were? Because sometimes the student will put the challenges out there, and then they'll kind of take it for granted that the reader just assumes that what that means. If a student grows up in a single parent household, like, what that's like. Well, no, I need to know what it was like for you. So beyond the challenges, what were the effects? We need to have that. Is it, what did that student do to overcome? And then finally, is it clear what they learned from the experience? So I offer this simple framework: challenges, effects, what I did, what I learned, as a simple thing that when you're like, hey, how do I give a student feedback fast? You can just copy and paste these questions and say, hey, everybody, before you submit your essays, answer these questions if you're writing a challenge, or answer these questions if your essay isn't about a challenge. But one of the things, and I'm going to kick it to Tom in just a second to talk about cutting words, because that's another thing that students are going to be doing right here at the end, but is before they submit. But I'll send out, like I said, sort of like the current draft of the Great College Essay Test, which is actually, let me just flash this up. Let me just, here we go. Stop sharing, and it's on a different one. I'll just share you with this, because these are the qualities that I mentioned earlier. Here's the Great College Essay Test, but it's got core values, vulnerability, so what moments, and craft. And there are different questions that students can answer, and kind of go through as sort of like a little checklist for like, am I doing all these things? And if not, it can kind of point to areas for revision. All right, Tom, talk to us about trimming, and then I'll talk a little bit about parents. Oh, you're muted, darling.
Thank you, darling. So cutting words is important because you
Nailed it.
sure, yeah, thank you. Talk about an insight, right? I passed the college essay test with flying colors. So cutting is something that actually it's probably one of the biggest areas of like, there's students oftentimes, I'd say, have like a paralysis, and there's an emotional attachment to what they have put down sometimes. And so to kind of be objective and take a scan through something and be like, oh, this can go, they'll be like, but I really like that lovely sentence about the wind bustling through the trees and the trees falling down in front of my house and causing a da 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 da. That's all fine and good. But I think being kind of that objective voice of, hey, as a reader and as someone who is familiar with kind of what these colleges are looking for, you want to prioritize certain elements of content that suggestions around cutting are really geared towards. So I was just actually helping a student with, he came in with 287 words and was like, I need to be 200. And I'm like, let's do this. Because I actually love it so much. And we have a blog that I'll share in the chat right now and just kind of do a brief walkthrough. for you all how to cut words. But one of the biggest kind of strategies or things that I think this particular essay employed or kind of revealed to me was he spent a lot of time in the beginning. The question was from Caltech, and it was like, talk to us about a prior experience in STEM and how it influenced you and how it encouraged you to want to go deeper on material or whatnot. And in this, what was supposed to be 200-word prompt, there was about like 50 words in the beginning of 2 summers ago, prior to my junior year, I attended a very prestigious program at a university called Harvard. That's a pre-college summer program. Delete. So a lot of times you're probably going to be working with students who want to recall or remind the admissions officer of a very impressive or notable thing that they spent their time doing. And a lot of this comes from a point of pride of like, hey, I spent a lot of time and energy. This was a program I did or something that was involved that was very layered and I was accepted or whatnot. But oftentimes reminding students, like a good place to identify cuts right from the beginning is like, these are probably things from your activities list that the admissions officer is more familiar with. So a brief recall of it is fine, but all the details around that can definitely be one of the first things to go. So I'd say that's probably one of the most common ones. And then other ones just tend to be kind of really wordy writing where it can just be said a lot more quickly. And that's an art that takes students a long time to build out. I'd say most of the time it takes college for that kind of like, I remember it was actually my like first year seminar professor, shout out to Dan Frost at Holy Cross, who told us all basically that we were trying to sound way too smart and that you just need to kind of like, and he's like, I know that that's kind of probably flew in high school, but like, it's not going to fly everywhere else where you kind of just need to get more to the point. But I'm living, breathing proof of that right now. So let me go ahead and share the blog. So again, this blog is one that huge shout out to Lynn Fairchild Hawks, one of our amazing essay coaches, and Andy Simpson, who is our editorial director, who manages basically all of our blogs. So they put this piece together and did a great job of, I'd say, identifying particular key strategies, because I know realistically, not all of you as counselors are going to be able to be super in the weeds, providing all of your students with necessarily the one-on-one support to help trim down those word contents, sometimes by half or more. So this blog is particularly, I'd say, very valuable in putting together these specific actions and modeling out how to kind of go about through these 4 different strategies, word by word, phrase by phrase, line by line, or idea by idea, in terms of asking the student, where can I identify material to be removed from this essay while still preserving the essential details that need to happen. So probably my favorite part of this blog is this section right here of what should go and what should keep, because I think it does a really good job, especially like that sports commentary. This is probably something you're all very familiar with. It's the play-by-play of like, I did this, and then I did this, and then I moved it over 2 inches. And then actually, I was actually reading an essay recently where like there was words that were spent describing the dimensions of the card deck that they were using. And I was like, that can go. That's, I think, in an effort to bring a more specificity, which we ask a lot, but that's a detail that really isn't central to your key message that you're communicating, or the skills, qualities, values, and interests. And I think kind of the don't cut section here does a really good job of kind of underscoring the things that are most valuable for a student to keep. The other resource that I wanted to share as well is a show, don't tell blog. So that's something that I use oftentimes in tandem with this how to cut blog, is showing versus telling, because in terms of the don't cut pieces, that blog is actually, I'd say, an extension or a elaboration on the things that are the most valuable to keep in an essay. And they really do a good job of kind of showing students where to cut the more like generalized summary sentences, things that are like, diversity and inclusion is a very important value that's very much in alignment with my own, because we should all get together in harmony. That is usually a sentence that is probably referenced in the question that was asked. So the school is very aware of that, and very much in alignment with that thought. How can you show, and oftentimes I encourage students to use sentences like, whether I was this or this, I try to embody X quality or value in all that I do. So I'd say using sentences like whether and then listing kind of off specific examples is a good way to kind of accomplish that goal. And then another one too is kind of grouping together like key examples by values. So yesterday we did a big like live essay review session where we had a bunch of students come on and we tried to give live feedback to as many of them as possible. I think we ended up getting to like 80 or 100, which was amazing. And one of the students whose work that when one of our coaches was having tech issues, I just jumped on and hopped into like a random doc, and he was having real trouble cutting his words. He was trying to describe all these specific instances of putting together a chess club in Palo Alto. And he was like, well, I don't have a way to I want to keep all these examples, but the way I'm outlining it now, it's way too long. And I noticed that two of the examples had to do with initiative and one had to do with creativity. So I was like, if you organize the paragraphs by this taught me initiative, whether I was doing this or this, that's how I accomplished it. Was able to kind of have him kind of smushed together and still preserve the specifics, but have it be kind of centered and themed more around the actual value, skill, or quality that's thematically kind of grouped in that paragraph. So that's another just anecdotal strategy. But again, this blog does a really, really great job at kind of going through more concrete tips and great examples too of how to actually do the thing, especially in case you can't be working with it on students directly.
Yay. I'm going to repin myself like I was going to say something like a butterfly, like a a butterfly who doesn't mind. I mean, and never mind.
Yes. I also want to double shout out in the chat, Dewey. The that trick is a great one. So Control F on an essay. The word that, you can often knock out like 5 words right there. Right. Another small hack, if you attach an M dash to a previous word, the Common App actually counts a separated dash as its own standalone word a lot of times. So if you combine it to the previous word, that also helps save you a few words here and there too.
All the tips. I love this. That's lovely in the weeds example. Okay. I don't often talk about working with parents on sessions, but I do have some things to say about it. And I want to talk about it before, during, and at the end of the process. So I have more to say on this, but here's sort of like the 5-minute version. I think it's important at the before the process to really set expectations. And maybe that's like, I don't know, obvious or something. But I feel like, a simple way to do that, a simple technique is to do a parent questionnaire. And you're kind of like, yes, Ethan, I know I do a parent questionnaire, but I want to share 3 things from the parent questionnaire that we send out that I think are really cool and that you might find interesting. One is the first exercise that we have parents do is we have them do their own values exercise, in part because we want them to know kind of some of the exercises students are going through. But I think it can also be interesting to sort of see, in the spectrum of things, what are some things that the parent is valuing? Because it allows me to just project all kinds of things. But I think it's interesting to sort of just see, okay, well, what is the parent, finding important? And then there's a little thing that's like around your top 3 values. We just ask them to say a little bit more about why these things have become important to them, because we're also trying to get to know them and how they're orienting in the world. And of course, it's their kids' process. The second question that I think is a really interesting one is, what do you believe to be your child's greatest achievement? Because I think that oftentimes what the parent believes is the greatest achievement is not what the kid believes. And sometimes that asking that is like, oh, it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't have found out until the 6th conversation with the student. So asking the parent to say that, and sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes the kid says the quote unquote, they think it's the extracurricular thing that's obvious, but the parent is like, I think their biggest challenge, their biggest achievement was making it through junior year when his father and I were getting divorced. And you're kind of like, whoa. So there's something there from the parent's perspective. So I've loved seeing different ways that parents tackle that question in terms of achievement. And it also kind of is indicative of how the parent is orienting towards this notion of achievement, which I think can be interesting and revealing. By the way, there's a whole lot of knowledge on this session right now. And I want to just invite folks, if you feel the desire to, and you have an idea, to share what are some questions that you ask parents in your questionnaire, or what do you find to be interesting questions? Feel free to throw those in the chat, because I'd love to just invite some crowdsourcing potluck style moment. A third one that I really like is asking, what was your college experience like? And how do you feel like it influences, or how do you feel like it's shaped your hopes for your child? Now, that sounds like a very leading question, but I find that's a really nice one for finding out a little more about where is the parent. Again, I use the word orient. How is the parent orienting, and what are their potential biases? And that, just teasing out that, can be really interesting and useful, I find. This is great. Nitya is saying, hi, Nitya. We ask parents how their student faces challenges or disappointments. That's a great one. How do you picture yourself being involved in the juniors college process? What are you looking for in a consultant? Yeah, what are you looking for out of this process potentially? Dewey says, get a sense of expectations. What will be your disappointing out? What will be a disappointing outcome in your mind for this process? Yeah, I sometimes I'll ask. Let's fast forward to March, let's say, when before we even know where the student is accepted or not, or February. What for you will have determined a successful process? So I'm taking success hopefully out of the sort of like where the student got in, and that being the only measure of happiness or sadness. So those are some things before, like 3 questions. Again, what are the parents' values? What's the child's greatest achievement? And what was your college experience like? And how does that shape your hopes for your kid? During the process, I find that when tough stuff happens, I have a particular resource that is my favorite go-to one, and it rarely has guided me astray. And you've maybe heard me say this before if you've been on 5+ webinars, but it's this book, Nonviolent Communication. And if you've never checked out this book, make it, and you've got a little time this holiday season, check out this book by this sweet man, Marshall Rosenberg. He's sweet, but he's also funny, and he's kind of crass sometimes. And if the audiobook is awesome. And also he's got some cool stuff on Spotify. For those of you who already are familiar with Rosenberg's work, he's got some cool live sessions that he's done, and he's really funny. I fast forward through the parts where he's singing songs because those just aren't my favorite part. But there's a simple thing that he teaches, and it's connecting to feelings and connecting to our needs. And you'll see on my refrigerator here, we've got a little printout of like different feelings and needs lists, the feelings and needs inventory. And if you've seen my resource on this, it's connected to like helping students brainstorm topics. But I've found that even though it can feel vulnerable at times, if there's a complex conversation that I need to have, and it's, let's say, with a parent who is wanting to be really involved during the process, let's say, and they're wondering, for example, why a student's essay looks like X or looks like Y. The first thing that I'll often do when I'm in my right mind, when I'm listening with my giraffe ears, as Rosenberg calls it, giraffes have the biggest heart in the animal kingdom. And so the giraffe ears are sort of like listening with your biggest heart, is thinking about, well, what is the parent's need here? And if this, I'm just making up a hypothetical situation, but let's say a parent is wanting the essay to be better than it is, or let's say be done sooner than it is. The need is often for some kind of like certainty that the essay is going to be good, and there's some kind of like stability. And one of the things that Rosenberg sort of teaches is like there are ways that we can start to and we get better at this with practice, project into what is the actual need, and then actually asking people and then checking what I'm hearing is a need for this. And it sometimes is a great place to find the common ground and saying like, hey, I'm hearing a need for this, and it's something that I really share. And it also just helps to help the person feel heard. And then sometimes, tapping into what are my own feelings and needs, like, yeah, I'm feeling X. And for example, in a situation, if a parent is feeling, hey, this thing is, I'm feeling a bit, I don't know, I might say to a parent, I'm feeling a little bit, anxious reading this, and then say a little bit why. And for some of you might be like, well, I'm not going to like tell a parent that I feel anxious, but I found that like speaking from my feelings and then sharing what my needs are, and it might be my needs for the student, like, hey, I really want so-and-so to have a great sense of autonomy through this process, and I really want them to be self-governing, that can be a great path. So I'm kind of giving like a very short primer, like a 2-minute primer on NVC, but tapping into my feelings and my needs, and using those as a guiding, light post, as it were, a lighthouse for my conversation, can be a good way, I think, a good starting place. And then when we're getting towards the end of the process, if a parent is sort of like, unhappy with the essay, of course, like you, I'll probably be like, well, what does the student think? And does the student, what's their take on it? And oftentimes I've had lots of conversations with students where they'll be like, oh, my, so-and-so doesn't like it, my parent doesn't like it, or my English teacher doesn't like it, or my counselor doesn't like it. And I'm like, well, what do you think about this? And I'm trying to get them to sort of suss out what is the mechanism for like determining what is good, and give them, criteria where they can actually decide that. But I'll say this, that sometimes when a parent says an essay isn't quote unquote good, the first question I want to ask myself is like, are they right? In other words, like, because it could very well be that like the essay, yeah, is lacking certain things. So the first thing that I'm trying to do is go, is there something here that is worth, like, if sometimes it's like the image is like a parent is shooting like 100 arrows, or that, coming at you with a lot. It's like, well, are there arrows in here that are like actually useful? Are there three of these that are like, ah, yes, the opening could be more compelling? And so oftentimes I'll find that sometimes the anxiety or the urge has to do with like a particular sentence, and when that particular sentence or those particular sentences are revised, it actually kind of like all of that ire suddenly like magically goes away like a lot faster than I thought. I'm like, oh, it was just that thing. I thought you like hated the whole thing. Now, there's a whole separate conversation, and this is like obviously a whole separate session on whether to even engage with parents. There's certainly a move to be made to go, hey, thanks so much. I'd prefer to like, I prefer to like connect with the student on this and to not even have the parent, essay conversation. But if there is a conversation where you find yourself, I think a good first question is to be like, are they right? And if I feel like I disagree with the parent, oftentimes I'll go back to this great college essay test and be like, well, here are some things that I find to be useful: values, insight, craft, and vulnerability. And if I can point to those moments in the essay when I think the student is doing all these things, that'll sometimes, diffuse, or it'll be like, hey, here are some things that I think this essay is doing really well and why I think it's doing really well. Sometimes they're just going to disagree, and it's just going to be like, hey, I believe that this is just a great essay, and here are the reasons why I think it's great. Here, oftentimes it's around originality, like the student is doing something that I've never seen a student do before. They're doing it in a way that I haven't seen it before. And I'll say that, hey, from my experience, I think this is really gonna help them, stand out. But if the essay is if there is something that's like, okay, this is probably worth looking at, I'll again point to that great college essay test, like values. If it feels like, okay, the student isn't really revealing much, that's something that is doable in a couple of weeks, or in a week. Okay, yes, it could be more specific in a particular paragraph to reveal this particular value, or yeah, some of the insights, maybe it doesn't really pop in terms of those insights, and so the revising those ends of paragraphs to be a bit more uncommon is something that can be done in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. When it comes to revising like whole new topics, I find that's a lot harder to do. Again, I'm probably preaching to the choir in just a couple of weeks. So one of the things that I'll advocate for is to students is like, maybe don't change your topic in the last 2 weeks, especially before regular decision deadlines. Sometimes students can before early decision, because there is the possibility that they maybe don't submit an early decision application. But I will often advocate for students to like, keep your topic in those last couple of weeks. And that's why you'll often not see a lot of sessions in CEG land, but like the 2 weeks before deadlines for students, because I find that sometimes when I'll look at a topic and I'll just be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what we can do here. And my impulse is to tell them to try with a new topic. I just don't want to deliver that feedback to students, honestly. So maybe I'm talking at both sides of my mouth, but it feels like, in terms of if a student is dealing with, let's say, a common topic, there are certain things that can be done in terms of the values, in terms of the insights, and even in terms of the oftentimes it's the clarity of the topic that can be done with some, short tweaks. So yeah, that's kind of like I guess I ended up being like the 7-minute take on things to, ways to navigate conversations with parents. I'd love to, again, invoke the wisdom of the crowd and hear, what are some that occurred to you? What are some favorite phrases that you use, or questions that you like, or that you've heard that you'll sometimes use when it comes to navigating those difficult conversations? Feel free to share those in the chat. We're going to shift to Q&A. Yeah, you got a thing, Tom? We're going
to I just got a question share with me directly that I'll just share with everyone else.
Great.
In the chat. But I wanted to provide like 3, I guess, like talking points for families that I found to be particularly helpful when it comes to especially concerns about the quality of their essay and application work in particular. The first one is, oftentimes families and parents in particular are the ones who are the most adamant and convinced that achievement is the only quality and value worth writing about, and just out-achieve the hell out of every kid in this pool. And what I think it's really important to do to remind families is that the vast majority of students who are applying to selective colleges have a laundry list of achievements that are frequently voiced and, pushed till death in their essays. So writing about other things very much can tell you is something that is a lot more interesting and revealing and filling in that gap. So that's number one. Number two is, a lot of times families and parents in particular, they think of the application or they think of the college application as a job application, where you need to show how qualified you are, and here are the concrete reasons XYZ. And reminding them that the admissions officer is not hiring someone for a job. They don't have like, oh, we need people with a certain skill set to fill this in. It's a lot more layered, and there's a community fit element that, of course, some jobs say like, you're coming into our family and our community. No, they need people who have the qualifications to do the job that's there. So I would say, kind of, I guess, like reminding them that the college application is not an application that they're maybe as familiar with and has changed a lot from when they were applying is another one. I had a third one, but for the sake of time, I will stop because I'm blanking on it. But those I'd say are two big strategies that really do, I'd say, help kind of families remove a little bit from the process, and especially some of the pain points of like being a little over heavy handed. And the last one that I would say too, it came to me again, is whether the essay is like Harvard material. Because that's something that comes up a lot, is like, oh, this essay is good, but like, is it good enough for this school? And as if there's kind of like tiers of quality of essay for like level of selectivity of a college. And I often talk about how, like, on social media, and I'm sure plastered on many parents' Facebook feeds, there are all these things about like, these are essays that got a kid into X. And the rationale is, well, if they wrote about that, then my kid can write about it too, and have a smooth sailing future. I often talk about how sometimes students are admitted in spite of their essays. So those whole series on TikTok and YouTube that kind of talk about the essay that got me into Dartmouth, there are probably kids who are talking about that was probably the weakest part of their application, and it was other institutional priorities they were meeting that was the reason. So that's another third one that I often mention when, especially, quality of essays is a big concern.
Thanks, Tom. Let me say 2 words about our counselor training program, and then we'll do Q&A. So the email went out earlier today, but I'll just share my screen for a second about this. And I'm excited that we're launching it. We put the word out this morning, I think. And essentially, our counselor training program is really like a year-long program now. And the way it works is we've got the courses that I've taught for years, but this is kind of like the latest version of them, on the personal statement, on the application and supplements. And we've got a foundational track for folks who are newer to the practice, and we've got an advanced track. So we get into, in those advanced sessions, things like, what is voice, and how do we use AI with students or not? Do we just totally steer clear of it? Because that's something that now we have a year's worth of experience on. And there's some fun stuff that I've been getting into. I've been reading this 2 different books, one from the Moth Story Hour and one from like Pixar, and bringing in some of these next level strategies. And there are a couple different techniques that our coaches actually have been playing with that have been really cool to help students really stand out. So we're going to be getting into those in the advanced courses. And then we've got our community that's hosted on Circle, where we have sessions basically every month. And many of those sessions are essay sessions that are with me and Tom, where we're like reviewing essays and nerding out. And in some cases, like bringing essays that you're working with the student on, and we like talk about them. Some of the things, and just to, again, kind of give you dates and stuff, the personal statement one is running in February, and then the absence subs is running in March. And we've got this little discount, the sign up with a friend and get 20% off. We've got actually a few discounts, and we put them in the email, but I'll put the link in if you're interested to learn more about it. And yeah, I'm excited. And I feel like each year we've got, let me show you actually some of the sessions that are happening inside. We've got a sort of like launch session where we're setting goals and intentions for the year. And then, some folks who are newer, we're going to be thinking about transitioning to private college counseling. So we've got guest speakers like Cindy McDonald's coming in for that. We're, Katie, I'm forgetting Katie's last name on the top of my head, talking about working with student athletes. Hannah on our team is going to talk about productivity and Google Docs hacks. I've got an amazing coach that I know and work with who is going to talk about setting boundaries, both in life and in work. And a lot of essay review sessions, because we find that that's the thing that folks really, request the most. Were you going to say something, Tom?
I was going to say, in the spirit of Google hacks, I just want to share
that
go. Like, this is our little behind the scenes talk, but like, there's nothing revealing there. What I want to show you is, if you go to tools, review suggested edits, it literally will show you, like, if you have words cut on a Google Doc with the cutting tool, so the suggesting tool, and you're like, slashing and whatever, and you want to know how many words it would be if they actually accepted everything that you said. If you just go to preview accept all, it will show you what the doc would look like with the recommended cuts and edits. And then you can highlight it and know exactly like what the word count is. So that is a hack that I found out like 2 weeks ago, and it has changed my life.
I
So
love it. That's a great one. That's a great one. Cool. Let's do Q&A. We got some wows on that from Leah and from Jane. Awesome.
gotta leave with the mic drop. Yeah. It's
Love it.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Allison, thank you. I'm glad we had a moment to share that. Ethan, and thank you for the setup, because if you didn't show the productivity hack, I wouldn't have even thought.
Mindy's asking, do I recommend the workbook or just the book? I would say start, Mindy, honestly, with the audiobook. Like I would just you can get a free trial on Amazon and just for free, listen to this wonderful man. It's like a 5-hour audiobook. So maybe save it for a road trip or a jog or something. But I would go with the straight up book at first and just listen to him, like let it wash over you. And then the workbook is great. I mean, I'm in an NVC like work group and we're like kind of, going through it together. There's also cool cards called Grok Your World, GROK, it's just a stack of feelings cards and a stack of needs cards. Those came in the mail last week. So I'm enjoying those as well. But if you're like brand new to it, yeah, I would say just, dive into the audiobook. Alice, that was worth the price of admission. That's awesome. Let's see. Could CG host a Google Docs shortcuts session like earlier this year? Yeah, Dr. John, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're going to be doing that with Hana in a few months. Let's see. How many workshops will be offered by CEG that will not be a part of the year-long tuition? I don't know at this moment. We're going to be offering at least 12 inside the community. And we're going to be offering, sessions that are particular to like working with your particular students. And we're going to have like our coaches. So I don't know at this moment, exactly how many we're going to be doing besides that. So yeah, save it for a 5-hour jog. That's it, Carolyn. Let's see. People are still, I'm just looking at people's reactions from the Google Doc hack.
Yeah.
What else? What else are y'all wondering about? And if you posted a question that we didn't get to, feel free to repost it. I have to go in about 4 minutes because I have to pick up my daughter from her friend's house, and we're going to go get a Christmas tree, which I'm excited about.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do. Hi, Dr. John.
Hi. Just real quick. How I would like to know, what can I say to my students who have been rejected from their first choice schools to comfort them? Several of my students, one in particular, feels totally dejected and feels that it was a personal insult or a personal assessment of him as a person. And I've been trying to get him to see that there's institutional priorities that have nothing to do with him, as Thomas has mentioned in some of his previous workshops. But he doesn't really hear me. He just feels that they don't want him. So
yeah,
after explaining the things that you've talked about over the past couple of months, that some of the students just don't want to hear that. They're caught into the fact that I've been rejected, and it's an indictment on me as a student, and I'm not good enough, and they don't want me. So
I'd love to hear, Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And I want to invite our community, y'all who are still on the call, to please share. Some of you are sharing in the chats, but I'd love for y'all to share more, because this is a big one. This is a good one. Thanks, Dr. John, for bringing the question. Tom, what are your thoughts?
So Dr. John, I just shared a link in the chat, and it's an article that I think any of you can benefit from in working with students who are facing rejection. It's actually about, shout out to Linda McGee and the awesome college counseling staff at Downtown Magnets High School. I actually just was there a couple of weeks ago in person for their college night, and I was reminded that their school was profiled in the New York Times for hosting college rejection parties. And the article kind of does a good job of just underscoring their particular approach and philosophy around, kind of like, oftentimes it's the isolation of feeling like you're the only one that is a big contributor to those feelings. And it's, it's definitely not like a one size fits all cure to have people feel like they're not the only one who's faced this, but definitely the more that students understand just how common that feeling is, that's a really big way to kind of just let them know that they are not alone. This is something that the vast, like any of those kind of numbers, it doesn't exactly take away that sting and that taking it personally, but it definitely can really help. And a lot of schools have, you know, put together, for example, the school I used to work at, the students made an Instagram account, and some people actually on the administrative level like didn't like it, and I was like, I think this is super healthy for the students to be doing this, to put all the rejections and screenshots of their letters of places that they didn't get into to show all their peers. Yes, we're at this high school that's really talented kids, and it was such a hard acceptance rate to get into, but guess what? We're all still getting rejected left and right, right? So that I think can really help a lot with just, and you know, there's different degrees of anonymity that depending on the individual student and the culture of your community can be a healthy way to go about that. But that's one tip and resource that I try to share out to students and families, is that the lack of isolation piece and that feeling.
Yeah, I got one thing. I also think it's really important to not skip over that moment, that empathy opportunity to just be like, yeah, you know what, this sucks, and be with them in that for a minute. Because I think that if we fast forward to like helping them feel better and sort of, you know, giving them all the positive things and building them up, making them feel good, I think it's important to take a moment just before that and be like, I know I was really disappointed too. And just be with them in that. And I think that's another, just giving them a little dose of empathy.
Yeah, I say that to them. I say,
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I don't get it. I don't have the answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just because sometimes I really don't. Like this is beyond me. It baffles me. So yeah.
Yeah. There's some other resources in the chat that are coming through. And there's some different blogs and stuff, and we'll collect these and share these out afterwards. But I have to run, y'all, because I gotta go pick up my daughter. So we gotta wrap this session up. But I just want to say to y'all, I'm so glad you're here. Again, glad to be in community with y'all. I'd love to hang out with y'all, some of y'all next year in the counselor training program. The thing in the email that if you didn't read to the bottom, there's a little PS that's like, there's an extra discount for the first 50 people who sign up. So you can go back to that email and like scroll down, and all of the discounts for the counselor training program stack. So in other words, it's like there's an early bird rate, and then there's like sign up with a friend rate, and then there's also this other one at the bottom. So it brings the cost down, but for the first, 50 people or so who sign up. So I just wanted to flag that in case you missed it. But thank you all for being here, and thanks, Tom, for being my partner here and on this session, another one. And we love you all, and we'll see you soon.
High five.
High five. Psh.